Hello, this is Dread, and in today's video topic, I wanted to talk about a recent comment chain that I got on a video. And that's going to be from the cold fire dot tornado build that I recently made a video on. And I will say this build is definitely a zinger in terms of what it's been doing of late. I'm already at like 600 corruption and I don't even feel it at all. It's like I barely feel the corruption at all, and I'm about to make a bunch of upgrades to the build now that I've been grinding for a little bit, right? But what made me think was this recent comment chain. So let's start with it. So the first part of the comment chain is I absolutely love how your build insults everyone who mouths the popular opinion, paraphrasing. Shaman is one or two, three masteries that most needs a rework. Well, dear commenter, Shaman was that mastery that needed a rework for a very long time up until 1.0. So that's why people say that, is because it finally got the rework it deserved in 1.0. Now, this comment isn't what actually made this interesting, it's the comments under it. So let's see here. So we have three different comments that are essentially saying the same thing. Now I'm going to read them out to you real quick. So this video changes nothing. Actually, even proves he does. He has to get mana regen on every item and use low level uniques with spell cost reduction just so that this build is playable. That is not okay for abilities that scale with attunement, which he also stacks. The next comment, I mean, the fact that he has to do all this research and testing to come up with complex interactions to get a mastery to be viable kind of proves the point that the mastery should probably get worked out. In comparison, how much further could he take good masteries with the same amount of work, right? The last comment, to be fair, the fact he has to test this much, get mana regen on everything, etc., to get one niche build going proves exactly that Shaman sucks and needs a rework ASAP. So, the reason why this is interesting is it kind of like bleeds into the conversation of build diversity in last Epoch. So let's talk about the Shaman build in a little bit more detail so we have some context here. So the Shaman build that I'm playing is a Frostbite, well not Frostbite, but like a cold gathering storm Shaman that is being triggered from Tornado. So these tornadoes, they cast the Stormbolt for us. Now, Shaman is a very interesting mastery and has been an interesting mastery for a very long time. But one of the biggest strengths of Shaman is it gets all of its stats for free. So like for instance, it gets its elemental resistance stacked for free, right? It's capped. It gets its physical resistance for free, which is fun. It gets its percent damage for free with either cold damage per totem idols or with the spell damage per totem at the top, right? That's another big benefit of Shaman. Like I'm sitting at like 800% increased damage and I barely have any on my gear. And now all with the attunement scaling with Stormbolt, I'm getting all of my flat from attunement, right? And of course my offhand. Now, another cool thing is with the way that Gathering Storm works with the base crit inside its tree with the Maelstrom stacks. This on top of this the certain interaction I'm doing with Warcry, getting like 200% crit chance from this, right? And the 250% increased cold damage as well, by the way. That plus the Peak of the Mountain, which gives me 290% crit chance, right? That means that not only do I have my percent damage stacked, I have my resistances already stacked, I have my crit chance stacked, right? I'm capped on crit. I have my flat damage stacked, right? So I have all of these things for free, which means that to take advantage of all this, we have to look at the bucket system. So if you are unaware, the bucket system in ARPGs is simply put like this. You want as many buckets as possible, multiplying with each other. If you try to be additive with a specific bucket, there will be diminishing returns. Like, for instance, since I have a lot of increased damage on my gear, well, just for free, right, for existing, if I tried to stack more increased damage, it wouldn't do much for me. Critical strike chance is even worse, because if I try to stack more critical strike chance, like, it wouldn't matter because there's only a cap, right? Same thing with resistances. I can only stack resistances so much. I don't need that on my gear, and I don't need as much flat damage on my gear or anything like that because of my attunement scaling, right? Now, the only thing that we can do to push our damage further is to cast more. Now, with tornadoes cost a little bit of mana. So, since the fact that we get all of these stats for free, it actually gives us the freedom to run a wand like the Cinder Song wand that I'm using, giving me the minus mana costs and, of course, the cast speed and all that, right? And now all I need to do to make this build function is to stack cast speed and to stack mana regen. That's not necessarily a weakness. It is not a weakness of Shaman that it stacks all of the normal stats. It just requires just that teeny eensy wince of like creativity to get everything going, right? So instead of think of it like, oh, like I need a bunch of damage on my gear, I need a bunch of crit on my gear, you don't need any of that. You just need to stack these very niche stats, cast speed and mana regen, and then all of a sudden you have a very strong build. Now, my build is a lot more complicated than if you were to just go up straight up Frostbite, and I think the Frostbite version might be better, but I went for crits, and I also went for Font of the Erased, which adds another multiplier of weirdness to the build, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean the build is bad. I'm already at like 600 corruption, like I said before, and I'm going to be pushing even farther with some upgrades. So it's not necessarily bad, it's just more complicated. And sometimes there are going to be builds like that are more complicated, but are, like still good. Like they're not bad, they're just more complicated. And Shaman definitely before this rework definitely was on the weaker side, but now that it has the Stormbolt stuff where you get a 20% more multiplier from the indirect Stormbolt cast stuff, right? You get all of this flat damage for free, all of this percent damage for free, all of this resistance for free, as we'll be abusing that very heavily very soon once I get certain upgrades, right? All of this combined means that it ends up scaling completely differently than your normal stereotypical vanilla build. And that's why, these viewers are like, oh, like this looks ass. And yeah, it does on the surface, but in the end, when you're sitting on top of like 4 Wingari Axe Thrower packs, and you're just sitting on top of them and waiting for them to die, it feels great. It feels great. The interactions definitely make up for all of the work and effort involved. Now, of course, I love these kind of builds, right? Obviously, but there are plenty of times in Last Epoch history where the option wasn't always the most obvious. So, like for instance, with Flame Wraiths, right? Flame Wraiths were a pretty strong build after Wook and I tested them out, and then everyone else hopped on the bandwagon, right? And the original version that we played was utilizing mana regeneration on our gear to summon our wraiths and to sustain our mana that way. But some crazy fellow, he thought that, hey, Drain Life has a lot of stuff that gives you a bunch of mana per second if you put it on your minions. Well, wraiths are very fragile, so having them, get killed by your own Drain Life, that sounds like awful, right? On paper. But in practice, it ended up making wraiths into one of the strongest builds of all time. Like it's insane, right? And if you were to tell me like 2, 3, 4 years ago, it's like, hey, I'm going to use Drain Life to gain infinite mana to cast as many wraiths as I want, I would have looked at you like you were dumb, much like these commenters look at a shaman and look at it and think it's dumb, right? And that's definitely part of like the process of the video game, because I'll be honest, guys. Sure, there's a bunch of people coming in 1.0, but they're kind of like playing like a bunch of like meta stuff. They're not necessarily looking into all of these stupid and broken things it can do, because there's one flashy build that can get to 600k ward due to a bug or an unintended interaction, right? So there's a lot to explore left in Last Epoch. So that's all I have to say. The build diversity is much stronger than you think it is. With all that being said, this has been Dread, off to go buy my 4 LP chest. Bye.